So let's just go down the line. The first thing to understand is that the idea that good is subjective and therefore derived from people's opinions and cultures, I find that absolutely abhorrent, because there's been cultures that justified rape. For instance, ancient Rome, it was not a problem. If you wanted to go rape some woman of a lower case, you could go ahead and do that. I'm sure to our modern sensibilities that's always going to be wrong, but in Roman culture it wasn't. So here we've just established a first rule that if rape is always wrong, then therefore it's got to be that this can't be good. It just can't be. So here's the fact of the matter. You have murder is always wrong. You don't murder, you don't steal, you don't commit adultery, you don't cheat on your spouse, you don't blaspheme, because God gave us a good life. God gave us life and we need to honor him. And he goes down the list of the 10 commandments. They're fulfilled in the fact that they are rooted in fundamental aspects of human behavior. There has to be gratitude, there has to be thankful to something, and I think it's God. And generally, like I said in another video, God has to establish what's good, and this is why Jesus came, is to establish for us a life that's worthy of trying to live and emulate. And this is also why we have the example of Paul and other apostles, is that we have lives to emulate. And you see in this a definition for good and through actions of what Jesus Christ did, healing the sick, the blind, raising the dead, feeding people. He did a lot of miraculous things, but Jesus was a good guy. Jesus was a very good guy. He was, some might say, perfect. And I think he is perfect. I think the idea that you have to have a perfect ideal of what it is to be good before you can understand what good is. And on that first principle, I see good. I think a lot of philosophers have seen good. As Plato said, the highest ideal in philosophy is to attain knowledge and understanding of the good. And if your philosophy is not doing that, then you're essentially having bad philosophy. And this gets into the fact that a lot of people reject the first principles of, well, there's no good, therefore good is my decision. I decide what's good. Well, what if you decide that mass murder is good, or rape, or robbery? You understand there's some faults in what you're saying. And what if you say disgusting modern art with all of its little squiggles and it's like weird, disgusting things, that's good, like poop on a canvas that you hang in a museum, which I'm sure there's somewhere out there, or putting a crucifix in urine, which is an actual piece of art. You say that's good? It doesn't seem good to me. It doesn't seem beautiful or good. And so we get down to the first principles of goodness. It proves God exists because there has to be a higher intelligence that establishes what is good. It has to judge. And this is what God means in the Hebrew. It means judge. And in Greek, it means placer, someone who decides on people's fates. And judge is a great example of what God is. The most high living judge is Elyon. That's what Yahweh is. And he's the one who establishes justice. He's the one who establishes fairness. He's the one who establishes who goes into hell and who goes into heaven. And I think we need this first principle of good through Jesus' life to understand what type of life we ought to live. And I think we ought to know what good is through Jesus' example and also his teachings. Because obviously, you're never going to come to these first principles on your own. If I spent 1,000 years on this earth, I would never get even one of Euclid's principles. Not even a single one. And yet this man came to near 200 of them. And these principles are hard. And they're established in the fact that they just are. This is just a fact of the matter in Euclid. These principles just are. That's what you have to understand about a lot of things. They just are. They just exist, and they are as they are. And the same thing with number. And on that status that things are what they are and they exist, and in that existence there seems to be some sort of coherence to it that allows you to comprehend it. That's why I believe there's a God, because in that comprehension there is a design that can be comprehended. So here's the matter of the fact that I think that good suffices that God exists, and also the coherence of the universe, and like I said, number, but also ratios, which ratios are an interesting thing, that you can find a formula that fits to anything, and you can shape numbers through these formulas to get accurate results, which is one of the most beautiful things about mathematics, is that these ratios will fit in universally. So why do they do this? Why do things universally fit into these ratios? Why do they fit into these shapes? Why ought they to? If there is no creator, why ought they fit these designs? Why ought they? And here's the thing, like, I think those are two good questions, and maybe your answer is, well, they just are because they are. There doesn't need to be a God. That doesn't seem right to me. Just the same way as it doesn't seem right to me to say, well, I just get to decide what's good. I think there's a lot of philosophers in history who have been a lot smarter than we are that have come to different conclusions. And I think it's kind of dangerous to hold the presumption that there is no God and that there is no good, because that presumption leads to generally bad behavior being practiced by most people, and it doesn't allow people to have love or joy or peace. In fact, it makes everybody strive against one another and basically destroy one another. It makes everybody a man an adversary against everybody else, which you have to understand. There is an ethic that was developed by God and created for mankind to walk in, and this evidence is self-evident that this method works. It's worked in previous civilizations, and Western civilization, through most of it, it produced one of the most stable pieces in history. In fact, it was the most stable piece in history. There was never a more stable piece in the history of mankind. Without that peace, and when I say peace, I don't mean that there was no war. I mean that people had generally a benevolent attitude. They had better ways of being. They were kinder to one another. They were less selfish. They were more righteous. They were less of morons. Because like I see this fact that people need first principles to understand anything, and this is what I think Christ is that first principle of a demonstration of what a perfect life ought to be. And if you have that demonstration, you have those teachings, you can therefore understand what truly is good. Because again, it's not that Jesus came up with these things and it's his opinion. It's the fact that like neither is the principles in Euclid's opinion. It's a matter of fact that Jesus is a lot more intelligent than either you or me, and so is Euclid. They come to these principles on their own. And same thing with Pythagoras, being probably the most intelligent man who ever lived. He came to the conclusion that people need God. For what reason? So they can have benevolent attitudes and understand right from wrong. And this is a prevailing theme. This is all of our sages have said it. From Confucius to Pythagoras to Christ. You name a sage, they've all established the fact that to have a functioning and well-ordered society that actually has good feelings and good behavior, you need to first start with the principle of God. And that establishes ethics, it establishes materialism even, because what's happening is the postmodernists is deconstructing materialism, and I don't know why they're doing it, but they're doing it. And if you don't have this first principle of the fact that a thing is and it exists of its own nature independent of the human perception and awareness, then you lose all of science, you lose all of ethics, you lose everything. Everything that philosophy has built for the last 6,000 years, you lose it, and then you're left with nothing. And in that nothing, it's going to be replaced by something. And what it's replaced by is usually chaos.